Okay, a very good morning to you all. Today I will be explaining the part 3 of chapter 3. Okay, and so today the points that I will explain to you is about the historian view on the institution of slavery, and the other point is the role of the slaves in the Roman economy. First, I will explain to you about the views of different historians or scholars about the institution of slave. Slave is an institution of slavery has been existing in the human society since time immemorial, and different scholars has shared their opinion about the shared their views on the institution of slavery. The first one is by Aristotle. Like family, village, and state, slavery is also natural, and it was based on the natural inequality among men. All men do not possess the same amount of wisdom or reason. Therefore, wise rule and lead the life of freedom, and idiots and unwise idiots and unwise were destined to lead a life of subjection or slavery. This is how he tried to justify about the slavery system. And another one is the principle of rule and subjugation. By nature, some are born to rule and others to submit to their rule. So this is how Aristotle tried to justify about the institution of slavery. Another one is by St. Augustine. He says that slavery was as punishment for the human sin. So whoever has committed sin as a sign of punishment, they are treated as slaves. This slavery system continued till up to 18th and 19th century with the coming of the new ideas like liberals. Okay, liberal is a philosophy based on the liberty of everyone, and another new idea is humanitarian, which supports the promotion of human welfare, and socialist is an economical and social and political philosophy that believes society should control the means of production and distribution. All because of all these new ideas, historians and scholars began to condemn the institution of slavery, and gradually the government of many countries legally abolished slavery by the middle of the 19th century, and slavery disappeared by the end of the 19th century. So that is all about the ideas of the different scholars about the view of the institution of slave. Now I will explain to you about the role of slave in the Roman Empire. The Roman aristocrats owned large tracts of lands and also bought lands from the peasants and employed slaves to work in their large estates. Slaves were made to plow their lands, clean their fields with their and work in their mills and grind their grains with their hands, work in the grapes and olive press. And these slaves were also appointed to work to look after the herds of cattle for their owners. And not only working in the fields, but the slaves were also made to build the roads and ships, and the Romans, they built big ships and had at least 150 to 200 slaves as oarsmen for rowing the ships. And many slaves also work in the field, works in the workshop or in the shipyards. And the condition of the slaves, of the Roman slaves, was miserable. The owners, they considered these slaves not as humans, but they treat them as like any kind of instruments or tools, and they considered that these slaves were kind of a talking instrument which can be used by the Roman people. Once a person become a slave, he lost his name. He will be given another nickname. Often a hateful name was given, or they were simply called as Persians or Egyptians. Slave owners, they never show any kind of mercy to their slaves, and they were exhausted with so many hard works. Slaves during the period of sowing and harvesting in the field, slaves were made to work up to 18 hours a day, and the slaves who are made to work in the mill for grinding the grains were and they were the wooden wheel were put around the neck of the slaves who are working in the mills, so that they could not steal the flour from the mill that they are grinding, so that they cannot, the wheels are always fixed in their necks so that they don't steal the flour from the mill. And the slaves, the master of the slave, they used to give, the owners of the slave, they gave only one sleeves or one blouse to each slaves in a year. And after the year, at the end of the year, when the slaves become turned into a rag, those rags were also not given to the slaves, but even the rags belong to the owners. And those rags which are taken out from the clothes of the slaves was again taken by the owners and turned it into a quilt for their blankets. And the servants or the slaves the young slaves who become invalid or means like who become sick or who become injured or become disabled, they were and because of this, because of their sickness or because of their injury, if they cannot work, they were taken to a desert island, and where they were allowed to die out of hunger. And since the markets, since the slaves are available always in the market, the owner is always ready to go and buy a new slave which is available in the market. So that is how the slaves were treated in the among the Roman people. And there was also another group of slaves called the gladiators. Among the slaves who are strong and who are more tough and strong were trained how to use weapons, and we turned them into slave gladiators. So these gladiators were men or women who fight each other, or they even sometimes fight the animals. And the Romans, they built a big amphitheater. Amphitheater can be, compared to a kind of modern times football stadiums or auditoriums. And these gladiators, they were made to fight, in those amphitheaters. During the time when on holidays, on the holidays, the Roman people, they will met the gladiators to wrestle between one another, and in the arena of the stadium, that is at the center of the amphitheater, in the arena, in the center, the wrestling competition, a kind of a wrestling competition is staged, and they were made to fight each other. And the fighters who do not fight bravely were given were given lashes violently, were beaten violently because they were not brave enough to fight others. And the fate of the ones who are defeated while they are fighting, the defeated gladiators rested in the hands of the viewers of the Roman people. If they raise their hands, that means the defeated person's life is that means the defeated were to be left to live. And if they pointed their thumbs down, the victorious gladiator was to finish the defeated one, was to kill the defeated gladiator. And after a person, after a defeated person is killed by another one, the attendants, they even appointed an attendants, and the attendants will drag away the dead body of a defeated person in a hook from the center of the arena. And the gladiators sometimes they not only fight among, they were not only made to fight among the gladiators, but they were also made to fight the lions, tigers, and other wild animals. So that is all about how they maintain another group of slaves called the gladiators for their entertainment. The Roman slave owners, they use different methods how to keep the slaves under their subjugation, subjections. They adopted very cruel method in order to keep their different slaves under their subjection. In order to prevent the slaves to run away from their owners, they used to lock up the slaves in a prison with a small barred windows at night, or many slave workers were made to sleep together in a heavy iron chains, which sometimes left a deep gashes on their bodies. That means which left a deep cuts in their hands or in their legs because of the iron chains. Another method they follow is they put a collar that is a band that is fastened in and around the neck of a slave, and they used to put the inscription saying that "Hold me so that I don't escape." And another one is sometimes the owner used to put the stamp on the brands of as branded on the face of most of the slaves, so that the slaves don't escape from their owners, or the slaves don't run away from their owners. The slave owners, they even keep the watchmen to watch closely over the slaves, fearing that the slaves might make a conspiracy against their slave owners. The slave owners they always forbid the slaves not to speak to one another, and the slaves were either the duty of a slave is either to work or to sleep, and they were not made to talk with each other. The masters tried to buy the slaves and in order to not to make the slaves talk with each other, the masters used to buy the slaves from different countries, in order not to let them understand the language of each other. In order to create the fear in the minds of the slaves, they used to often beat them or torture them, so that fear is created in the minds, or the fear is created in the minds of the slaves. And they often used to burn them, or twisting their limbs, so that the fear is always created in the minds of the slaves, that if they try to escape or if they try to run away from the owners, they will be treated as such. And the slaves who try to run away from their owners were often punished very brutally, and they will be bound. Their hands and the feet will be bound in a post in a perpendicular plank, and the person will be left outside in the sun and made to die slowly. Slow and terrible death by the sunburns, by the scorched death, they were made to die slowly and steadily in the sun. So that is how they try to use different methods in order to keep the slaves under their subjection. There was another rebellion that was started by the group of slaves. A famous rebellion that was started by that was led by a slave gladiator, a slave escaped gladiator. His name was Spartacus. Spartacus was one of the most strong and powerful slave who escaped from the gladiator, and he along with the escaped slaves, he tried to rebel against the slave owners in 74 BC. But he and his groups and his followers were defeated badly by the Roman slave owners, and the last battle between the slave rebellions and the slave owners took place in 71 BC. And in this battle, Spartacus was crippled, and during the fight, and his body was never found in the battlefield. And once he was crippled by the Roman soldiers, his followers they insert the rebels who were, rebelling against the Roman government. They surrendered and they were defeated badly. So that is how, the slaves, they even go to the extent of trying to rebel against the slave owners. So this is all about the role of the slaves in the Roman economy, and the views, the historian views on the institution of slavery. I will continue in the next class.